right, so we're just going to dive right in. A couple things. Please keep yourself muted, although we will try and keep an eye on that so we don't have feedback. We are already recording this workshop. If you would like to have a live transcript, you can enable this on your own screen for subtitles. Don't know how to do that.
I think to do that, you'll have to go to if you go to more, you can choose closed caption.
Yes.
And that can help, and that will enable the caption for you so that you can also see what we're saying.
Great. And we're just going to let Lance be on top of the chat for this. So if you do have any comments, please feel free to put them in the chat. Please feel free to ask questions as we are going along. That's totally fine. We want this to be fun for you. It's very informal. Alex and I love questions. So we are here to help you become a better seed saver. And
away we go.
Here we go. Okay, so tonight, here are some things we're going to cover. We're going to talk a little bit about genetics and breeding. So we're going to do a little bit of botany, but not much. We could probably teach a whole entire workshop on that. And again, this is called mini seed school. So we unfortunately won't be able to have a deep dive into that, but that's okay. We are also going to talk a little bit about seed patents. Those are important for you to know a bit about. And as it relates to us losing seed varieties, as well as species, we need to know about that as seed savers. It helps inform what we're doing, and it's something to keep our eyes on. And it does affect us, and it affects farmers globally. So tonight, our focus is on wet processing. At our last workshop, we were talking and went over skills of dry processing. So some crops are wet processed and some are dry processed. We're going to mostly focus on wet processing. We are also going to give you some tips on storing your seeds, doing germination tests, and then we're going to talk about a little bit more tonight on like what are some exciting things going on in the community right now. Specifically seed cooperative, seed bank, and seed shares that are coming up. You have anything you want to add?
No,
okay.
Got a lot of stuff coming up.
All right. We would like to do just sort of a walkthrough for those of you who are with us for workshop 1, and then those who may were not at the first workshop. We just want to go over kind of what we talked about during that time to start us off. I think this is just kind of an important backbone and just for a little review. So we talked about in the first one, open pollinated heirlooms as being the seeds you really want to look for. So right now you might be thinking, I want to save seeds this growing season. I need to source my seeds. So we talked a lot about the importance of sourcing locally, as local as possible, and looking regionally. At the end of the evening, we will have a slide again on some of the seed sources that we really like. But as you are diving in those really beautiful seed catalogs, if you are a seed catalog nerd, I don't know, are you a seed catalog nerd? Of course, yeah. Yes, it's like my favorite bedtime activity. Yeah, as you are just, drooling over your seed catalogs right now, take a look. You really want to be looking for where it says OP and heirloom seed. There are some companies that focus on predominantly heirlooms, so those are a great place to kind of look. I just want to do a shout out to Buffalo Creek Seeds in Kansas. That is all heirloom seed. They're amazing. They're a family run and operated seed farm. Please check them out. There's lots of other great ones too. Meadowlark Hearth, can't forget them, in Western Nebraska, certified biodynamic and organic seed, also all heirlooms. So please check them out. For me, it's like easier if I just go to a company that like has heirlooms predominantly. You want to make sure that your seed is also good quality seed. So I personally wouldn't go to the hardware store and pick out a seed packet and choose that as like where I am starting from if I'm wanting to get into seed saving. So that's important too. We talked a lot in the first one. Have little air, little gnats in the greenhouse or something. So we talked a lot about how it's important to be mindful of healthy soil and healthy plants. So even though you're just focused on the seed, that reproductive part of the plant, it's like you still have to take care of your plant. You still need to be watching for pests and diseases and things like that. So that's something we covered in the first one. These are all things, if you didn't attend, you can ask us questions later in the session if you want to get into. And then these were the things that I think were most eye-opening for folks probably who maybe have saved seed but never looked at a seed saving chart. You need to know what minimum population and proper isolation is needed for your seed saving. So that's really important. There are charts for that. You do not have to memorize it. I know Alex is wonderful at having some of those memorized. I do my best. Like I can always say, like for corn, you have to have a mile. It's pretty easy to remember. But as a seed saver, when you're saving to get true to type, you really need to pay attention to those things. Obviously, you're going to plant, you're going to tend that crop properly, you're going to save it properly. That means harvesting it at the right time. And we talked about how with seed saving, and actually that's a big thing with wet seed saving, you're not harvesting when something's market ready necessarily, except for tomatoes. Yeah. Did I get that?
And red peppers.
Yes, and peppers, excuse me. Okay. So some things, but some things not.
Yeah.
So that's why it's important. And then you want to store properly. In workshop 1, we also told you that the best thing to do as a beginning or novice seed saver is to just start with something easy on yourself. I mentioned that calendula is like one of the first seeds I saved, and I saved it with like 5- and 6-year-old children. And I was very successful and it was amazing. So be easy on yourself. Lettuce is really easy to save, stuff like that.
Yeah, it's really always good when you're trying to save the world to start simple and be successful with just a small piece than to try to go too big, too fast and not really be able to have any of those real like successes at first. So always good to, start simple, start small, and keep encouraging yourself year after year. Gardening, farming, you're never going to get it all down. Consider it like a lifelong situation. You're never going to run out of things to do.
Yep. Bueno. Okay, we're going to do a little overview here of some seed saving terms. Do you want to talk about?
Sure. Yeah, so last time we really focused on how to save seed that is true to type. So that would be preserving a certain variety of seed. And so we talked about hybrids are seeds, or hybrid plants are plants that are created by crossing 2 stable, genetically distinct parental populations. So basically it's 2 really different types of plants. So it's like a small yellow cherry tomato and a big purple Cherokee tomato. They're really different, and you cross them and maybe you get like, I don't know, a medium-sized purple cherry tomato. Because they're so different, they have really wide, those plants, those seeds that come from those plants have a wide genetic diversity. They've got a lot of different genes going on, and you can get some really great, productive, delicious, pest-resistant varieties that way. However, if you try to save seed from a hybrid, what you're going to get is a reflection of all the different genetic diversity within that hybrid. Because it comes from 2 totally different types of plants. So you have your small purple cherry tomato, and if you save seeds from just 1 cherry tomato, say there's 60 seeds in that little cherry tomato, you're going to get 60 different types of plants that result from that, because the original parents were so widely different. So hybrids are awesome. They've been great strides in agriculture for taste and virility of plants. However, they're not great for preserving a seed variety. To preserve a seed variety, you're going to want to start with open pollinated. So open pollinated seeds, open pollinated plant varieties are plant varieties that are created by allowing plants to cross-pollinate with each other naturally. And so when that happens, it might originally be that you had 2 super distinct distinct varieties, and they crossed to create this purple cherry tomato. But if somebody keeps saving only the purple cherry tomatoes that result each time from that plant, And eventually they just keep planting out purple cherry tomatoes that can only cross with other purple cherry tomatoes. What they'll get is an open pollinated variety that is a purple cherry tomato. And because after so many generations of doing that, usually it's about 7 or 8 generations to dehybridize something or to create a stable open pollinated variety. What happens is after those 7 generations, what we mean by like a stable variety is that you're consistently getting purple cherry tomatoes every time you save seeds. And so then you're kind of narrowing that genetic diversity each time. You don't want to get it too narrow, but if you hit that sweet spot, you can confidently save seed that results in this, that is true to type. It results in plants that look like the parent plant. So when you buy an open pollinated variety, somebody has done that work for you to get that stable open pollinated variety for you. And if you follow the minimum population guidelines and the isolation distance guidelines, you will be able to preserve that variety, that open pollinated variety, ad infinitum into the future. Now, an open pollinated variety that has been saved for 50 years or more is called an heirloom variety. And so that is just an open pollinated cultivar that has been passed down for over 50 years. It's considered stable and it's just really badass that people have done that. So we call it an heirloom variety. Yeah. Okay. So do you want to?
Yeah, I can give a little intro. So we this evening are going to get a little bit into, I kind of mentioned, but we could probably talk about this stuff for a really long time. You note the picture on this slide. You probably recall having these lessons in like elementary and middle school in your plant biology or whatever class
Possibly college.
It was called, or college as well, hopefully. So maybe this will be a little refresher. We have I have simplified this very much, but essentially what you need to know is you need to know a little bit about pollination and how it works, and that you will not produce viable seed. I think this is the most important part, unless your crops are adequately pollinated. The second part that I think is really important for you to know, I mean, it's important for you to know the parts of the flower, right? And what is the flowering part of the plant? How to identify that on your crop. That's something you can look up and go outside and, we're not outside on a farm with beautiful plants growing right now. It's still winter. So that's something you can do on your own time or remind yourself of. But I think what's important for you to note is that the crops that you are saving for seed, and we're mostly focusing on food crops here, they're pollinated in different ways. We shared out some seed saving charts with you last time. On those seed saving charts, it will tell you what those crops are. Are they self-pollinated? Are they insect pollinated? Are they wind pollinated, etc.? This is really important for you to know. And specifically, I'm going to pass it up to you in a second, but one reason why this is important to know is because we are talking a little bit more this evening about creating new varieties and how you would go about something like that. In the last session, we talked a lot about just the easiest thing, which is just preservation. So you're just trying to preserve that variety over and over again and grow it out each season. So this information is a little bit more important for as we think about selection, which you probably know that term, and what traits you might select for that you like in a crop. Let's say a tomato, that's kind of the easiest thing. For example, back to heirlooms, as Alex was mentioning, I don't know. When I think about heirlooms, I think about all the things my grandmothers have passed to me. That's just the image that comes up in my mind. And I think about how they selected those items and seeds, potentially, they went out and selected for certain traits over and over again. So then they could hand their children seeds that were based on, the varieties that they essentially created. So that's kind of how we get here. And you explain it really well. So now I'm going to let.
Yeah. Before we go on any further, just with seed saving, it's always going to be really important that, this is maybe very 101, but you can only have seeds if something flowers. Sometimes things like tomatoes, we see the flower and then we see the fruit, and then we know that the seeds are inside of the fruit. Okay, pretty self-explanatory. But other things like arugula, if we're just like production farmers or production gardeners, we're really trying to prevent that arugula from flowering. But when we're seed savers, yeah, we probably want to prevent that flowering for a couple of weeks so that we can eat the arugula. But at some point, we're going to have to go to the thing that we're always trying to stop the thing doing, which is let it bolt.
Yes.
So really important to know what the flowers look like, because sometimes it's obvious. Obviously, tomatoes are obvious. Arugula is also somewhat obvious, but like lettuce is a lot less obvious of a flower. So you need to know what the flower looks like, and you also need to know what the seed looks like so that you know you can identify what's going on with your plant when it's going on. Additionally, knowing every single part of the flower is good to know, but yeah, really just got to know what that flower looks like and how it pollinates. For example, corn is wind pollinated. So a lot of times folks like to shake corn to get that pollen from the top to fall onto the little silks on the ears. And then you'll notice as you read through your seed charts that things that are wind pollinated need larger isolation distances, and things that are, say, self-pollinated, they can, or insect pollinated, you can do with a lot smaller isolation distances. Additionally, thinking about your wind pollinated, insect pollinated, if you can't accomplish your isolation distance through simply space, sometimes you can create blocks. So if you have one variety in front of your house and one variety in back of your house, you could have a smaller isolation distance because you have a giant house in between. But just thinking the isolation distance that you're going to want to use for something that's wind pollinated is going to be like a house. Mm-hmm. And the isolation distance that you can use for something that is insect pollinated could just be other flowering plants between different varieties. Okay, let's hit, unless there's any questions real quick about that.
Yeah, please feel free to put anything in the chat. Lance will relay that to us if you have any questions. I think the only thing I wanted to mention and that we're not covering this evening is this is how, for example, new varieties of squashes, summer and winter and things like that come about. What Alex is talking about, there are different techniques you can use for hand pollination and isolation. This is what seed farmers do when they are creating new varieties. That is like a 3.0, 5.0 class that we could have a whole class on. It would be wonderful, especially if we could be out in the field and teaching some hand pollination. So I just want folks to know so they can have that image of how this all works. That is what seed farmers do. That is how we get new varieties. Like, for example, there's this little baby butternut that's sweeter. It's do you know what the name of it is? It's a new honey nut, I think.
Oh, yeah.
You may have heard of that, but that's kind of like a newer thing because it's a more compact, smaller butternut. It's sweeter, and, so just kind of keep in mind all that cool stuff with seed saving. So I'm just going to kick this off and then we'll kind of talk about these things. But I wanted to say, and I know I mentioned Rowan White in the last one, but I think I came into seed saving from a space, and we talked about this last time as well, but I really came from a space of climate destabilization, and our climate is changing and we need more resilient seed and we have no seed sources, and kind of wanting to come from that angle. I want to make sure that myself and my community has food. And if we want food, we need seed as a farmer. I didn't come into seed saving as a botanist or as someone who thought about plant breeding. And it wasn't until I went to Seed Savers Exchange and heard Rowan White speaking, talking about our relationship with seeds and that we are plant breeders when we are engaging with seeds and when we are saving them, and when we are selecting. We're creating this relationship that is all about plant breeding, and it's totally all about nerdy science. And I don't know, I just wanted to throw that out because.
And I think that we'll talk about this when we jump into patents later, but seed saving is not it's not super easy. You have to pay attention and be consistent, but there is like some aspect of it that has been made overly difficult, like this idea that like we can't feed ourselves unless, unless this is done in a lab. And so I think that it's like, yeah, definitely starting off as a seed saver. It's like, well, I'll do this for fun. And it's like, no, like you're a plant breeder. Like, how do you think we got to labs?
Yeah.
We were just doing it out here in the field for
Yes.
thousands of years.
Yes.
And we can continue to do that. Like,
since the dawn of agriculture.
yeah. And so like with the patents, a lot of that is trying to take like the power away.
Yeah.
And so just remembering that quote is that like, you have amazing power and you have the power to do this. And when you do this, you are acting on that power.
Woo.
Woo.
Okay. So I don't.
Okay. Do you want me to take it from here?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So today we're going to talk about plant breeding a little bit more than preservation. So that's last week we really broke down seed saving into preservation and creation. And we just talked a little bit about what preservation looks like. And last week we said that in preservation, there's always going to be some amount of creation. Like if you grow out 20 plants and you just save seed from the ones that are really drought tolerant and say it's only like 5 plants, that's going to really like, that's a heavy selection method. But if you save seed from the 15 plants that do the best in a drought condition, then you're selecting for drought tolerance, but you're also keeping your genetic diversity as wide as you can in open pollinated variety. So there's always going to be, like I said, some amount of creation, some amount of selection. Just the fact that you can only grow, say, 20 tomatoes in your yard, the fact that you're only growing out 20 tomatoes for seed saving, that's selection of some amount because there's 20 other seeds in your packet, right? So there's some amount of selection and preservation, but there's also some amount of preservation so there's some amount of creation, plant breeding in preservation, and there's also some amount of preservation in creation, in plant breeding. So real quick, just gonna go over these vocabulary words to help us have this conversation about plant breeding. So first one is genes. Genes are a particular section of DNA that tells a cell to perform a specific task, like be green, be delicious. Of course, being delicious is going to be something that results from multiple types of genes, not just one, but that group of genes will be like be delicious. Another gene might be like be drought tolerant. Some genes might be like be delicious and drought tolerant. So when selecting, if you're selecting for drought tolerance, you also might have some sort of inadvertent effect on how something tastes. So hybridization, that's the process of breeding closely related but genetically different plants. So closely related because they're both tomatoes, genetically different because one's a big Cherokee purple tomato and the other one's a tiny yellow cherry. Genetic diversity is the total number of genetic characteristics in the genetic makeup of a species. So it allows for adaptation and to changing environments. So the total number of genetic characteristics, that means that the genes that are saying do different things. So if you have like a narrow genetic diversity, that means that you're only going to have like a narrow amount of genes, and a problem that could arise with that is similar to a problem that arises with monocultures. If you don't have a wide enough base of genetic diversity and say it's really rainy that year, and then it might be that your genetic diversity is too narrow and every plant in there can't handle that influx of water. But if you keep your genetic diversity wide enough, you might find that half of the plants can handle that influx of water, or maybe only 3 of them. So that's kind of how you could see that allows for adaptation to changing environments. A wide base of genes allows for a wide amount of adaptations. And so that can be important in preservation. Like when I gave the example of if you have 20 tomatoes and you only save seed from the 5 most drought tolerant, like, yeah, you're going to get something that's more drought tolerant, but droughts aren't the only things that happen. You might also have floods. You might also have cold weather. You might also have bugs. So that's why it might be best to save seed from the 15 most drought tolerant plants. You're still selecting for drought tolerance, but by selecting from 15 plants instead of 5, you have that larger genetic diversity so that these plants you have like genes in your seed base that might also allow for adaptation to an influx of water. And then, like I said, you don't want to, if you select for something too narrowly, like just drought tolerance, that might have an adverse effect that it changes the taste as well. So keeping your minimum populations large is good because that helps to allow for more adaptation in that variety. So phenotype is a set of observable characteristics. So that something's delicious, or that it's red, or that it's drought tolerant. And then the genotype is the genes that are actually causing those phenotypes. So the gene that says be red, the gene that says be delicious. And then inbreeding depression, this is loss of vigor because your genetic diversity is too narrow. So it's because you've only saved seed from the 5 most drought tolerant tomatoes for the last 5 years, you've lost a lot of that genetic diversity. And one of the effects of that is going to be that it doesn't adapt, the resulting seed bank, the plants that come out of it don't adapt that well to other situations. So that's what the loss of vigor is. It's inability to adapt well. Okay, any questions about that?
Throw them in the chat, go ahead. I have a couple things I wanted to add, like inbreeding depression, I think is so important, something I'm still learning a lot about. But as you become a seed saver and you continue to save varieties over the years, this is one thing I love about seed saving. It is a communal activity. It needs to be done in community. If I'm just saving from my farm over and over and over again, I will experience loss of vigor in that variety I'm stewarding or growing out. I need Alex. I need Alex to also grow that variety so that we can share a little bit of seeds. And that is why having a seed bank is so important. That is why we're trying to grow a seed bank in our area and get more folks on board to do this. So I think that that's really important. The other thing while you were talking really came to mind for me, I haven't thought a lot about, is we are just gonna talk so much and hammer home, hopefully for you, how important diversity is, diversity versus monoculture when it comes to a more secure, resilient food system, and just like an idea of more ownership and sovereignty in like our food. But also I was thinking a lot about how important it is for us to grow our crops and to save our seed and to have them interact with our climate and our environment and our bioregion. And if we're doing things like growing indoors in contained environments all the time, and we talked a little bit about labs, and we're getting our seed from there, when we bring things and we contain them and we grow them in that closed contained environment, I know I keep saying contained, they aren't interacting to the elements, and then they aren't able to develop those adaptations that we need in order to have resiliency. So I don't know, that's just something as you were talking, I was like, oh my gosh.
Totally, yeah. It's like epigenetics or something where it's like the environment you're in is affecting what you're expressing.
What you're expressing. Yes, so we can see that even in seeds. I think it's really cool.
Yeah.
We learn a lot.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, because it's like a seed, for example, like, some things, like I know, like, for example, like when you're, like tomatoes will get a little bit, like the leaves will kind of get purple when it's cold out. If they never get cold, they won't get purple. So you'll never be able to observe that characteristic.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's
This is
talk,
the fun part.
let's talk about plant breeding. So we're going to take our conversation about preserving seeds, and we're going to kind of move it to the side, and we're going to talk about how we create varieties. Okay. And so the ways that we can create varieties are all over the place. We can create varieties by, taking hybrid seeds, taking plants that are hybrids and saving seed from them, because we'll get so many, like we said, like if we cross those two tomatoes and we get this purple cherry, and then we know that that purple cherry is a hybrid, and then we plant out 60 seeds from that purple cherry, because the genetic diversity inside that one tomato is so wide because it comes from two totally different types of tomatoes. You know, you don't need to save seed from 60 plants if the one plant that you have comes from two totally like genetically diverse parents. And so if you plant out each of those 60 seeds inside of that one purple cherry, like we said, you're gonna see all types of different tomatoes. You'll see tall pink ones and short yellow ones and tall yellow ones that are cherry tomatoes that have 5 cherries on like a little umbel, and other ones that'll be tall and orange cherries and they'll have 8 cherries on a little umbel. You'll see all sorts of differences. And from there, if you went through the process of dehybridization, you would start to try to stabilize a variety by selecting for different characteristics. So you plant out that those 60 seeds from the purple cherry, and you really like the orange cherries that have 8 cherries per umbel. And so you save seed from that orange cherry tomato. You save a lot of it. And if you see anything else that sort of, and say maybe it's also, so in this point, when you're deciding what to save seed from, that is the selection process. So you might be saving seed from the orange cherry because it's delicious. You might be saving it because it doesn't get attacked by insects at all. You might save it because it, you know, ripens really early and it gets really tall. It yields a lot. You might save it because you like the color. You might save it because, unlike most cherry tomatoes, it's really easy to take to market, or maybe it doesn't burst. That's the thing with tomatoes. A lot of tomatoes burst when they get too much water. But if you can find a variety, AKA stupus tomatoes, if you can find a variety that doesn't burst, that, you know, that could be a really great thing, especially if you're a market gardener. So you might save, you might select for one of these things, but ideally you want to select for multiple of these things, because selecting for multiple things means that you're selecting for multiple genes, means that you're maintaining a genetic diversity. Now, I said that when you start with a hybrid variety, you have really wide genetics. So you don't need to worry about your genetic diversity narrowing too quickly, but it's always a good idea to try to save from multiple varieties or for multiple selections. And then at that point, you know, like I said, to stabilize that variety, to make it a stabilized open pollinated variety, what you would do is, you know, you save from those orange cherries that are drought tolerant, but they also don't burst. Your tomatoes are sounding pretty good. They don't burst when they get an influx of water, and they're easy to take to market. So you plant out 20 of those tomatoes the next year. You still got to have your minimum population. And then you only save seed from the plants that you're selecting, that have the phenotypes that you're selecting for. The orangeness, the taste, the drought tolerance, the non-bursting. After you do that for 7 or 8 generations, 7 or 8 seasons, you'll get a stable orange cherry. And then you can name it the O'Hanlon orange cherry, but you could also name it after yourself. You don't have to name it after me. So that's one way to plant breed. Another way to breed plants, and this is where kind of the biology comes in, is that you can do the crossing yourself. So you could do crossing of varieties by planting them really close to each other and letting them pollinate each other. Or you could do hand pollination. One thing that's called like land race gardening is when folks will take, say, 5 or 6 varieties of squash, and they'll plant them out. They'll be, you know, all different varieties, and they'll plant them out, and they'll just look at the plants that are doing the best. And in year 1, you might have like a butternut and a kabocha squash and say like a cushaw. And if the cushaw does really good, save seed from that. And if the other 2 don't do good, well, you don't have to save seed from that, or you could, but the Caughey squash is going to be, if you don't worry about that isolation distance and you grow those plants next to each other, some of those Caughey squash are going to get pollinated by those other squash plants. So you just save seed from what was doing really well, because that's what you can see, and you can see that that Caughey is doing really well. So you know that it's at least going to have some genetics that are going to allow it to do really well next year. Then you plant out, obviously it would be best to save from multiple plants, multiple fruits, and so save the ones that do the best. And then the next year you have to observe and start the selection process and say, okay, okay, now these squash that look like a Caughey but taste like a butternut, now this is good stuff. So I'm gonna save seeds from this. But the idea with the landrace variety is that you are constantly introducing new genetics, and you're never narrowing it down too much that it becomes a stable open pollinated variety. In a landrace variety, there's consistently more genetic diversity. So the downside of too much genetic diversity is that you can't necessarily be consistent, but the upside is that you'll have a lot of adaptation. And so anyways, you can see that there's like a lot of different results a lot of different ways you can go about plant breeding in your garden. The most important part about plant breeding is that you don't share that seed with someone else and not disclose the information. Don't be like, hey, this is a butternut squash, if it's not. If you haven't grown that variety out for a few years, just tell people like, hey, this is something that I just started growing out next year. I'd love for you to grow this out and tell me what it's like. Tell me, observe it and tell me, does it taste good? Does it do well?
Yeah. And that's one thing, yeah, absolutely. And that's one thing that's, I think, really important as we're going into like the time of sharing seeds and like actual seed share events and things like that are wonderful, to just keep in mind that if you haven't followed the process and the steps that we've outlined in the first one, and we'll go over it again later, if you're not looking at those charts, you know that you really don't know what you're working with or what you're sharing out or what you have. So just keeping that in mind, I think is.
Yeah, and I just want to like add one other thing, because like the Rowan White quote that like, if you're saving seed, you're a plant breeder. One way that you can be a plant breeder is just by heavy selection. So you don't have to be like, I'm going to put these two totally different varieties next to each other. You could, if you select gently, like if you select for the 15 most drought tolerant plants every season, you are a plant breeder who's breeding a drought tolerant variety of Stupus tomatoes or butternut squash. So it can be simple as well. But after a while, so there is like just kind of that line to walk. Like at what point do you stop saying this is Stupus tomato and say this is drought tolerant? At some point, if you select enough, your variety will become distinct. It's usually 7 to 8 generations.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on this slide. I do want to show you kind of a picture, which I think is on the next slide. But for me, I always want to boil it down and be like, why do I need to spend time thinking about this? Why is it important? How is it important to my community? How is it important to my food system? So just to kind of put that all out there, this is so critical. This work of seed saving and stewarding seeds and genetic diversity is so important, because it is what is going to allow us to, I like this monoculture productivist model. I like that term that they use in this quote a lot. But it's really what's going to help us make sure that our food system is not so vulnerable, make sure that we are maintaining a lot of diversity. And at the same time, I think it's just so important to think about how you go to the grocery store and there's, I don't know, what did you say, like 3 varieties of lettuce, 2 varieties of lettuce? Maybe
3 if it's bougie.
We really need, 3, right? Like 3 if you're like shopping at Whole Paycheck or something like that, aka Whole Foods. So I just think it's so important for us to like think for a minute that we will lose varieties if they are not stewarded. if they are not grown out, if that seed is not saved. Like that is why it's so important for us to engage in this work. And it's not only for food crops, this is just as important for us to think about our native ecosystems, depending on whatever bioregion that we live in, and why seed saving is also important there. So just thinking about species loss, and I was totally blanking, but there's the plants, what's the group that does the wild plants, wild plant savers, native plant savers? Is that what they're called? There's a really, I'll try to link it. When we take a little break, I'll link it. But there are also some really, there's an awesome group that's working on saving wild and native seed. And also, just of note, our food crops and where they came from, wild plants. So that's important. This is just a little, this says in 1903, commercial seed houses offered hundreds of varieties as shown in this sampling. This is only listing 10 different crops with beets, cabbage, sweet corn, lettuce, radish, squash. You can see all of these. In 1903, our seed houses or seed banks or what we had on hand had 497 varieties of lettuce. And then if you go down below, I think it says 36. Is that the little lettuce? Hopefully, maybe you can see it.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So in just 80 years, and I think it's so important for us when we think about the food system and we think about agriculture in general, this is something that I know I learned when I got into farming, like in 80 or even 50 years, like how farming and agriculture has changed has just been huge. I have people in my life who grew up on farms right here, and they remember saving seed all the time. They cannot walk out into their fields anymore and save that seed. It is illegal due to seed patents. And due to the control on seeds, essentially, on genetic material, and how corporations have come to own the rights to those seeds, and actually to prosecute folks who want to do this work that we think is so important, of saving seeds and engaging in this, having your own seed sources and sharing those with the community. So I just think this is like a really good image. If you haven't ever seen it before, you can go online, you can read all kinds of things about the loss of varieties and the loss of genetic diversity when it comes to seeds.
And I guess like when I think about this, it's like seed houses, like never even heard of a seed house, only heard of a seed company. Yes. So just kind of like even signaling like how different the culture of saving seed was back then. Yeah. And just thinking now, like, you know, traveling is really popular. It's more popular than it's ever been. And I think that's, you know, really cool. But I just love this idea. Like my favorite thing about going other places is like eating food a different way. But I feel like everywhere you go, you get like kind of the same cabbages. So just imagine if there was 544 varieties of cabbages. Like you'd be like, this summer we're eating cabbage. Yeah. So I just don't think that there's really any downside to, like I said, what we always have to do is be consistent about what we know about the seed, because we want to save things. We want to create things that are delicious and productive. We want to be the foundation of a thriving local food system. So we just want to be clear when we're in the process of saving seed, or especially with plant breeding, you're going to get some stuff that's inedible. You're going to get some stuff that there's a reason that it's not being saved, you know? So you don't want to give anyone false hope by giving them seed and saying like, hey, this is going to turn out a certain way, unless you have that variety stabilized. So you've been saving it for 7 to 8 generations, generations being seasons. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be engaging in trying it out. You know, you don't, just because you saved some seed from 2 lettuces that crossed, that doesn't mean it's going to be bad. And it doesn't mean you shouldn't grow it out the next year. It just means don't give it to your sister who's like, I want to grow all my own lettuce this year and it's my first year gardening. Because if she gets some bad seed, or if she gets the seed that is not the delicious, productive stuff, that might encourage her to not want to keep doing it. So yes, we totally need to be moving forward with like breeding and heavy selection and things like that. But we just want to stay within these confines, like a ping pong of making sure that we're being really transparent about the seed that we're sharing, trying to save the best stuff that we can like vouch for, except for with people who are in on this like experiment with us. and also keeping our selection broad enough that we're not narrowing our genetic diversity too much. So ping, ping, ping.
Yeah. I'm not sure who actually said this, but something that's coming up for me is the quote that seeds are our greatest currency. That's something I think about a lot. You made this amazing comment, I feel like, where you were like, what are the downsides of any of this? And I'm like, well, Alex, the downside is I really want to take your stupidest tomato and I want to steal it from you and patent it and then make money off of it so that you can't have it and all of your friends can't have it anymore. And I want to claim it as my own.
I don't like that.
Yeah. So I mean, that's where they look at what the downside. Okay, well, I can't profit off of it anymore or steal it. So you probably know a lot about this, and we touched on it in the last one. But how are we losing seeds? How are we losing all these varieties? I just think it's important to give an overview of that. We're obviously talking about proliferation of corporate agriculture and seed patents. This has actually led to very, very high rates of farmer suicides globally. Specifically, if you want to look up Vandana Shiva and read about what's going on in India and with farmers there, I just encourage you to do that. Seed, the Untold Story is an incredible film that speaks about this and just how vast patents have become and how they affect the folks that all around the world grow and produce food and do, in my opinion, some of the most important work that we are doing.
And it is a coordinated effort.
Yes. Let's be clear.
Yeah, like there is, you know, yes.
Yes. And so we also talked about seed rematuration, or maybe we brought up that term in the first one. And if we didn't get there, that's okay. But that is also a practice that folks are really promoting right now, which is so important, which is to give seeds back to Indigenous and First Nations peoples and communities where they have been stolen, where those varieties have actually been taken by seed companies, actually by even some seed companies that like are started out as smallerish seed companies run by white people. So that practice is so important. I know that there was a webinar that Seed Savers Exchange did recently on seed rematuration work. So please check that out, look that up. And then, as we mentioned, not stewarding or growing out varieties. That's how they're lost. You know, Alex's grandma gives me this seed and I grow it for a couple seasons and then I just stop and I don't share it with anyone and I don't, you know, that is also what happens.
And I think, you know, something that contributes to that or did contribute to that over the last like 50, 80 years is that there's this, you know, this idea of like trying to take the power away from doing it. Like, oh, well, you can't save seed unless you're in a lab or you're on a farm. They, you know, tomatoes, the minimum population's 8. A lot of people grow 8 tomatoes. It's too many, but a lot of people grow 8 tomatoes. So that means a lot of people can save tomato seed, especially if we coordinate amongst ourselves and we either grow 16 plants of the same variety, but there's one that's acclimated to Cait's place and one that's acclimated to mine, or I grow out 10 of one variety and Cait grows out 10 of another variety, and now we've got 2. So part of the reason for loss of stewarding is this idea that like you got to have a lawn, you can't have a garden, and your garden's not big enough for you to do this. Well, your garden might not be big enough for you to save corn seed, but if you do that with 10 of your neighbors, it very well might be.
Definitely. Those are calypso beans, which are the seed of the year. Yay. So the picture also in this slide is my daughter and I growing out calypso beans. I'm super excited. It's the seed of the year. I'm going to throw in some of my own saved and like mix in as I'm planting out this season to kind of see what happens. I'm excited about that. And I just we're going to take a break in a couple minutes, but I really like this quote. I found it as I was just doing some research. And I farm in so-called Iowa right now, but I like this. The crops that we grow are the basis of our civilization. If anything belongs in the public domain, it is the crops we grow for food, those seeds, and our ability to save them. I think we're going to take a break after this slide just to give everybody a couple minutes and kind of shift gears. I'm not going to talk a lot about this. I'm actually going to send along a handout. If you want to read about the history specifically in the US about what has happened with the seed and chemical agriculture industry, as well as patents. I'm going to send you a little history handout that we use in our more expanded seed school. It just has dates of how things have kind of been rolled out. How we used to save seeds, we used to have seed libraries. The government used to give out seeds to folks for free. But the most important things you need to know right now about seed patents are when you're looking at those catalogs, as we mentioned, PVP patents and UBP patents, utility patents. You want to look for those. That's really important. A lot more seed is becoming patented as I continue to look in the catalogs. Sometimes I'm also confused and I don't understand what's going on. Again, if you are buying from a company that's growing out heirlooms, you do not have to worry about this. Local companies, they're not carrying patented seed. But I just think some of those larger companies, especially if you're a market gardener, market farmer, you are going to run into these patents in the seed catalogs on specific varieties, and you need to pay attention to that. Do you want to add?
If you're upset about this and you want to advocate, the Farm Bill is probably a good place to start contacting like your Congress people, state senators. Farm Bill comes out every 10 years. And that's where a lot of agricultural subsidies go to folks that create patented seeds. So that's, you know, like one way you can fight back is like growing your own seed. But another way, if you want to kind of like stop this on the policy level or advocate on the policy level to put seeds in the public domain, Farm Bill is a good place to start that conversation.
Okay. All right, we are going to pause here and take a little break. It is wet seed saving, but I thought I would just start out with a quick review of dry processed seeds. So those are going to be things like your beans, a lot of your annual flowers that some of you might already be growing, zinnias, marigolds, a lot of those herbs that are annuals as well, and perennial ones, prairie grasses if you save for those, things like arugula. Did I already mention lettuce? I don't think I did. Dry processing, harvest when those seeds are dry, ideally on the plant, bring them in, process them using screens, fans, essentially threshing and winnowing to get the chaff separated from the seed, store them properly. That is like,
that's it.
A very basic dry processing. If you want to process seeds later, we're going to talk about seed processing days, which is something that happens in Omaha each year. That will be the hands-on offerings that we have later in the season. We would love for you to come out for those. But tonight we're talking about wet processing techniques. So there are some crops that need to be processed because we need to remove the barrier that is usually around that seed. I like to think about the gelatinous stuff of the tomato that's around those tomato seeds. For some wet processed crops, we also want to do a process of fermentation. Mostly tomatoes and cucumbers. Those are the ones that you specifically want to do this for, as well as you can for some squashes and things like that if you want. But from what I gather and have been told, it's most important with your tomatoes and cucumbers. Again, with all seed saving, you need to know, when do I harvest? When do I harvest to make sure that my seed is viable and that it's done? Because if you go out there and you pick a cucumber at market ready, the seeds are not ready to be saved at that time, okay? So we have a slide for these different crops and we'll go through that. But I think that's really the most important thing that you need to know. We shared out those seed saving charts, so that will give you some information. We're also going to share out this PowerPoint, but really my favorite guide for just like more extensive seed saving knowledge is the Organic Seed Alliance. It's actually a seed saving guide for farmers, but you're a farmer too. You can be a backyard farmer, you can be whatever size farmer you want to be. So that one I really like, that is very thorough. That's what I need. There also are great books. The Seed Garden is one, and then what's the Julie Ashworth one? We'll share the Seed to Seed. Thank you. So those ones also are going to give you more detailed guide per crop. So you can open to the page of that very specific crop and say, I have a cucumber, I have an eggplant. What do I do? Please remind me. So those are really great resources. The one from Organic Seed Alliance is a free download online. So that's why I'm all about it. I print it out, I put it in a binder, I laminate it, and then I can use it when I'm out in the field to be like, wait a minute, I still forgot what I'm supposed to do here.
And I guess I just wanted to add that with like, you know, there are some very like thorough seed saving guides out there, but sometimes like a seed saving guide might tell you, wait till the eggplant gets yellow. And you might wonder how yellow. And what you can do is just a lot of intense observation. Like this eggplant was on there for 15 days. And then you wet process your eggplant and you do a germination test. Do the seeds germinate from an eggplant that was on there for 15 days past market ready? Okay, then that's all you need. But maybe you have another one that's on there for 20 days or 25 days, and you do the same thing. You wet process it, but you keep them separate in your germination tests. And maybe you get a higher germination rate from the eggplant that was left on the plant for 20 days. And then you can say like, okay, 20 days is how long I leave my eggplants on. Yeah. So you can read, but you also got to do your own experiments. And a lot of that is just going to be keeping track, keeping things labeled, getting really geeky about it.
Record keeping.
Yeah.
If I was going to say this later, actually, in the presentation, I thought about it, but if I could have been told two things, well, there's more things, but two really important things up front before I started farming would be record keep, and label.
And have lots of socks.
Yes, and have lots of socks for when you're out and your feet get wet.
But yeah, record keeping and labeling like are kind of the key to getting better, because you got to be able to keep track of what did and didn't go well.
Yeah. Keep a notebook, keep a binder, pay attention to what's going on in your garden and observe. And that's what I think is beautiful about farming too, is that you can read books, like you said, but it could still express differently in your field. So you have to practice this in order to really learn it. And something that I think is really awesome, I had an opportunity to work with farmers who came from many different countries and were settled here into the area. And it was so amazing to watch folks teach one another and teach me when they were so gracious to like let me learn from them about seed saving, about what to look for, and to point to different, oh, that squash, it's ready now. It's ready for us to for seed saving. Or that gourd, now it's ready and we're going to pick it. So you really have to see and observe it, because like you said, with the color, you might read it in a book, but then you go out and you're like, well, is it this? I don't really know until someone shows it to you, really. And you see that over and over again. That's also how you learn to identify plants. So brains are cool. Here are some great tools that you will probably like to have on hand for wet processing. Bowls, glass jars, I really like to use for wet processing. You're obviously going to need water, knives to cut open, spoons and things like that to scoop out your seeds, cutting boards. Please wear gloves if you're processing hot peppers, and like also don't do that with children. It's just a bad idea. Just you're gonna get it in their eyes. It's gonna be terrible. I've been there. I've done that. It was so sad.
So some things that you can process when they're market ready would be tomatoes, winter squash, and peppers like that you eat red. So also remember to have some Ziploc bags, because when you get rid of the seeds, you're still going to have that plant flesh that's perfectly good for eating.
And cheesecloth. I really like to have cheesecloth for my fermentation process to put on my jars and rubber bands. We will have pictures of this coming up. Here's just a picture of some things that can be wet processed. You can kind of see they're going into bowls here, like tools and labels. Okay, so wet process steps. I'm going to actually go here just so we can kind of look at the tomato process, because this is one that folks are usually really interested in, or maybe they've never done before. Oftentimes folks come to me and they're like, I have this tomato and I saved it. I have no idea what variety it is. I didn't save from multiple plants. I didn't isolate it. I, didn't have minimum population. I didn't do the fermentation. And I'm like, okay, that's great. And that's okay. You're not going to be successful in what you're trying to do here. You need to follow the method, but we can teach you the method. That's okay. So that's what we're here for. So with tomato processing, you're going to cut open your tomatoes. You see inside the tomato, there are the seeds and all that gelatinous material. You're going to squeeze that out into your very lovely jar here, okay? The process that we want is for there to be, I mean, and it, again, this is another thing that people are always like, well, tell me exactly how many days. I'm like, I can't tell you exactly how many days because the humidity in your house is different than the humidity in my house or at my workplace or at my farm or whatever. So, but I would say, like, generally speaking, 3 to 5 days. Some texts I've read say 4 to 7, something like that. But what you're actually looking is for this beautiful mold layer, as you can see in the picture, to form. Now, you do not, this is another thing the jury is out about as well. So maybe Alex and I have differing opinions. I'm not sure. You can add water, okay? You can squeeze out all your tomatoes and add a little bit of water into that jar, or you cannot add water. My philosophy is if like you're working with itty bitty cherry tomatoes, and even if you save them, let's say Max Wild Cherry variety, okay, heirloom variety, and you save from the minimum population, you know, number of plants, and you squeeze them in there, well, there might not be that much liquid in there. You might need to add a little bit of water because you do not want this to dry out. When you put it in the jar, you want it to stay moist and like have those seeds be covered, if that makes sense. But you don't want to like fill the whole jar up with water and just have a little bit of gelatinous stuff in the bottom. So that's kind of that's my rule of thumb, or how I determine how much water or if to put water.
Yeah, I agree. I think it just depends on the variety of tomato. The 2 varieties of tomatoes I've saved in the past are pretty watery, so it's never been an issue, and I don't remove any of the water that's in there. But if it's not, you know, because I've saved seed from varieties that are watery, I just add enough variety. I add enough water that to a variety that's not a super watery variety so that it looks like a watery variety.
Yeah. Okay, so you can see the picture of the jar. What we're going for here is this mold layer. You're going to pour that off after that forms. You are going to also do something which is called decanting. So that means that you are at this point going to, you scoop off or pour off that mold. You are going to add a little bit of water then, okay, before you go ahead and pour your seeds out. And that is because you will have sinkers and you will have floaters, okay? The seeds, when you put the water into that jar after removing the mold, the ones that are going to rise to the top are the seeds that are not viable. So that's really important. You can go ahead and kind of just like, they just pour out basically usually. And the seeds that are on the bottom are the mature, most likely to be the mature seeds and the seeds that you're going for. So as you see in the next picture, then we're putting those seeds into a colander or sieve, and we're going to go ahead and rinse them really well. And that's just going to get there, and if there's any more like residue or gelatinous material off of those seeds that we believe to be mature seeds and viable seeds, rinse them. And then the last picture, I really like to put my seeds on a paper plate. Like that's my preference. Because you don't want to put them on something they're going to stick to. I think that's really important, and you want to dry them out. The drying out process, you need to spread them very thin on the paper plate, and also sometimes it can take a while. Again, depending on how your environment and where you're drying them out at, do not put them in direct sunlight. Set them on your counter somewhere, let them dry. Again, thin layer on there. You know that the seeds are ready when they crack instead of indent when you pick them up to squeeze them, okay? They should crack with your fingernail. I like to call this the fingernail test. I have a picture somewhere. I'm going to skip to it. It's right here. Cracking, dry seeds, mushing, those are not too wet. Okay, so going back, this is just what we covered. Oh, do I have a one? I don't know. No, I have all the other ones here, just pictures for tomato. Okay, so this is what we covered very quickly. So I'm just going to go back. Here are the steps for you to look over. Again, we're going to share this out with you. But essentially, the first step in wet process is removing your seeds by scooping or squeezing. Cut that open, get those seeds out. You're going to do a fermentation process for tomatoes and cucumbers. Add a little water if you need to. After the fermentation, you have your sinkers and floaters, so you're going to pour those ones that are not viable off and clean them. This guide said to let the seeds sit 20-30 minutes before decanting or skimming off the seeds that rise to the top. That's another way you can go ahead and do it. And that's kind of important, so you can, again, allow those seeds time to sort of go to the bottom. And then how you know that these are ready after they fully dry is by doing germination tests. We're going to talk about that later.
So cucumber, pretty similar to tomato. The big difference is that how you're going to harvest it. Tomato, you can harvest when it's market ready, unless of course you're growing green tomatoes for market, in which case you would wait till it was ripe. But a cucumber, you're going to leave it on the vine 4 to 5 weeks after it's market ready. So it's going to get big, it's going to get yellow. It might be kind of hard to keep away from pests. But the wall of a harvestable fruit, yeah, it's going to just be really ripe. It's one of those things where it's like, if you weren't trying to save seed and you found that cucumber in your garden, you'd be like, oh man. But if you are trying to save seed, that's what you're looking for. So yeah, 4 to 5 weeks. So thinking about that with cucumbers, that means that if you plant your cucumbers in May 15th and you expect to start harvesting them around, say, July 15th, that means that you're not going to be harvesting them for seed, that you're going to have to stop harvesting cucumbers at some point. Say you do a week of harvesting cucumbers, and so then July 21st, you stop harvesting cucumbers. And if you see something that's market ready on July 21st, it means it's not going to be ready for seed harvest until August 21st. So it's a long process. And you could just choose 2 fruits off of every plant. Say you had 8 plants and you could choose 2 fruits off every plant. And the way to indicate that to yourself or others in the garden would be to mark that fruit with, say, like one of those ties that you get with vegetables sometimes, or like a label that says like, do not harvest. But just mark it for yourself to make sure that you don't harvest it.
Yeah.
And then you're gonna follow that very similar process. You're gonna cut it open. A good way to cut things like squash and cucumbers is, instead of slicing them lengthwise, slice them like across. When you slice them lengthwise, you're more likely to cut open more seeds.
Yeah.
Whereas if you cut them the short way, you're more likely to be able to scoop the seeds. So think of like how you would get ready to make a pumpkin, like into a jack-o'-lantern. You want to take kind of that same approach with
that's
the
the vibe you
cucumbers.
want when you're scooping out.
That's the vibe you're looking for when you're scooping seeds.
Yeah, cool. These are just 3 ways also for the process. Like you can just rinse those seeds, decant them, and leave them to dry, or you can soak them for 8 to. So these are just like 3 different processes you can use with the cucumber. Some people ferment them the same way that they do with the tomato. This says 48 to 72 hours, a couple days, to allow that fermentation process to happen. Decant, rinse, lay to dry, same steps. It's really up to you. Again, as we mentioned before, keep note of what works well, and are those seeds viable? Did they germinate when you do your germination test? So a little bit about melons here, and I also put the scientific names at the top just because I want to say it's important for you to know those, to write those when you are making the labels. Some squashes specifically are slightly different and have a slightly different seed saving process. So it's just really important to kind of include those, like make sure that you're like, this is a melon, this is the variety that is, this is a scientific name. So I think that's really important. One thing that I love about melons, and one of my favorite stories ever from CSA farming, is to hand out your beautiful heirloom watermelons that you're going to save seeds from, and to tell your CSA members that they must spit all of the seeds into a cup and return those spitty seeds to you at the next CSA pickup, okay? And only a farmer would do that because we're a little wild. But essentially, that's what you can do. That is mainly what I have done. I do like to soak those seeds a little bit to kind of, again, like if I'm working with the watermelon, to get that gelatinous stuff off of it. I make sure that I go and harvest my melon and eat and enjoy it. And then I go ahead and dry those seeds again, paper plate technique, rinse and then dry. You can also, though, leave melons on the vine. I guess for me in particular, that does not work. I cannot do that process due to critters. they will eat all my melons. They will be gone. I will have no seed. So that's just something, again, this says remain on the vine until they have softened slightly. You want to keep in mind too, I mean, with seed saving, a lot of times for me, I'm up against wind in the fall. I have a dry seed out there that I'm trying to go out and harvest, but the wind is kicking up and that seed's ready. It's a lettuce seed, it's an El Campaign seed, whatever. It's going to be gone, you know, in like 24 hours. I'm going to go back out. It will all be gone. I've had that happen to myself so many times. Similarly, with a lot of these wet process, I go out to harvest a seed and I'm like, oh, well.
Well, and it's interesting because if you think about it, you know, dry seeds, those are made to scatter. So they want to do that. They want, you know, you're kind of trying to jump in between its natural process. And something like a melon, that is meant to scatter through poop.
Yep.
So definitely you are trying to kind of wedge between that seed and its preferred method for promulgation.
Yeah. So cut open, scrape out, soak for 8 to 12 hours. Eggplant. Do you want to talk about eggplant?
Yeah. Okay. So eggplant, you're going to want to leave it on the vine for an additional 2 to 3 weeks. This year I planted out about 16 eggplants, and I tried to continue to harvest the eggplants for market while I was saving seed. So in mid-August, I started to mark one plant with a twisty tie. I marked one fruit on each plant at least. And I just kept harvesting other eggplants around it. Of course, by leaving those fruits on to mature for seed, I did get a little less yield, a little less vigor in the plants, because one of the ways that we encourage plants to keep producing is we keep taking away their fruits before they can produce seed. So once you start giving them that opportunity, they will slow down a little bit. But so I lived them on for about 2 to 3 weeks afterwards. Honestly, like I was harvesting eggplant seeds, or I was harvesting eggplant fruits for seed in like October, because things do slow down a little bit in the fall. And so the ripening also slowed down. So it took about an additional 4 weeks in my experience this year for those eggplants to turn that dull brown. I had Florida high bush eggplants, so they're purple. They kind of look like the Black Beauty eggplants, but they were open pollinated seeds, and a couple turned green. And so I only saved seeds from purple eggplants though, but someday I'll also save seeds from the green eggplants. So what I did after that was I cut the eggplant into cubes, which is a little bit different than what we have here because I didn't have a food processor. So I cut the eggplants into cubes and I let them sit for like 24 hours, and I let some sit for 48 hours, and I let them sit in water. So this is the wet processing aspect of it. And the longer I let the eggplant sit, the easier it was to extract the seeds from the rest of like the eggplant goop. And it was gross. It smelled bad. But we got 68% germination rates on it. So I think it worked pretty well. But also, I did try to save seed from some eggplants that had ripened on the plant a little bit less, and we got a substantially lower germination rate. So scooping the eggplant seeds out is a great thing to invite friends over for. And yeah, I encourage everyone to try it. We'll be doing it at seed processing days too.
Yeah, back to the use of a food processor. The only thing I've ever used a food processor on is peppers before. So I don't know, I just don't have a lot of experience with that, but
that would probably help with
that. Helps, yes, with your hands and like avoiding dying because you have hot pepper.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think the only thing with peppers that's important to know, again, you can rinse and decant in the process, but in the harvest, is that you want to harvest them when they're mature. So you need to know what the mature color is, which I find people when they're planting usually forget or don't remember or don't know. They're like, oh, I planted this Italian sweet pepper like Is it done? What color is it gonna turn? I don't know. So like the seeds will not be mature or viable unless it has completely turned to its color that it is meant to be, which could be red, yellow, green, orange, purple, and brown. Often little known fact, green peppers are immature peppers.
Yeah, that will turn red.
Yeah. So I don't know. Do you have anything you want to add to your, obviously it's pretty, I mean, most people I feel like have opened a pepper and seen
Yeah.
seeds. So
So this year I saved some seed from a pepper that was kind of moldy. I had harvested it when it was red, but I also stored it for about 2 weeks before I took it to the seed processing days. And so we processed all the red peppers that weren't moldy in one bin and the red peppers that were moldy in another bin. And we actually got a higher germination rate off the red pepper that was moldy. So don't eat it, but I mean, I personally will save seed from peppers that are moldy in the future, because I think it was kind of that fermentation that was going on there that helped it out a little bit. But another thing we did at seed processing days was we did remove the seeds by hand with hot peppers. We didn't do any hot peppers this year, but with sweet peppers, we would just dunk the peppers in water and then just we'll like thumb knock them off the plant material. And then, like I said, we saved all that food and we made lunch for the next time. So you can definitely keep eating what you can eat.
yeah. Squashes. Did we already talk about squashes a little bit? We talked about cucumbers. So I think.
So I'd say a summer squash, you're gonna wanna treat like a cucumber.
Yes.
Where you leave it
Here we
on.
Here's the summer squash page. Yes.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Yes. So you go ahead.
I just say the summer squash, you're just gonna, when you think that you're ready to eat that zucchini, what you're gonna wanna do is, if you wanna keep harvesting around the fruit that you wanna save seed from, mark at least one fruit from each plant. The minimum population for summer squash is 12. That's a lot of summer squash, but mark at least one plant or one fruit from each plant, and then let that sit on the vine for about 6 weeks. This past year, I did that with Ford Hook zucchinis and definitely had some difficulties. Other people kept harvesting them, and it was kind of hard to keep the bugs off of them, but I did, and we were able to harvest. We were able to harvest them when they, were way too big for looking like you want to eat them, and they start to turn yellow. But they are hard to leave on the vine because of critters and bugs. But once you cut them off, you can actually let them cure in storage for up to 3 weeks. And that's going to help that seed to be even more viable. But something that is hard with harvesting summer squash for seed and then storing it is that a lot of summer squash do kind of get disease. And so the longer you let it cure, you might have a little disease situation. I definitely cut open, this was a winter squash, but similar instance, but I cut open a Calabaza de las Aguas this year, and woof, it was all liquid inside, and the seeds were not viable.
Yeah. Yeah. So similarly with winter squash, when that winter squash is done, ready to be picked, again, looking out for critters, disease, and damage, but you can leave that on the vine. So most of the winter squashes I've ever saved from, which is pretty few because I'm usually growing multiple varieties, I leave on there, leave on the vine as long as possible if I can. I usually have better luck with winter squash than with summer squash, keeping it on the vine, less likely for critters. It's really the same process for both squashes, to scrape those out, to rinse them, soak for 8 to 12 hours, to can, and then dry out. Again, I really prefer paper plates for doing that. I like to avoid paper towels.
I will say I use cookie sheets, or I use the tops of my bins.
Yeah.
I will say that the easiest stuff to wet process, to save in wet process, is going to be like tomatoes. Minimum population's 8, isolation distance is 40 feet. They're easy to wet process. Then probably eggplants, minimum population again is going to be about 8. Isolation distance is like 80 feet. And then probably peppers, minimum population is 12. Isolation distance is more like 300 feet. But, you know, the squashes, the cucumbers, they have big isolation, they have big minimum populations. They're big plants that take up a lot of space. They also have big isolation distances, and you got to fight the bugs, the disease, and the pests. Not to say you shouldn't do it, but if
They're
you're
2.0.
They're
not year 1 or maybe 3.
Yeah, that's true. Get a group of friends.
Yeah. Okay, seed storage.
Let's do it.
All right, this is important stuff. People ask about this a lot. Seed storage, you do not want them in direct sunlight, ideally in dark containers. Paper is preferred to plastic, which can holds moisture and can cause condensation. A cool spot that maintains consistent temperature. Some ideas for that are a cold closet, your basement, rooms on the north side, not south side of your house. Again, I just think it's really important to consider moisture. A lot of people like to put their seeds in plastic bags in the refrigerator, or they like to put their seeds in plastic in their wet basement, or they like to put their seeds in a tote in a room next to the bathroom where they're running the shower all the time. So we just have to remember that seeds will not be viable if they are in direct sunlight or if they come into contact with moisture.
Yeah, and I think that just reminds me of like dry seed saving and how like when you go out to harvest dry seeds, you want to harvest them into paper bags for that reason. And if you do ever harvest them into plastic bins, make sure you're turning that seed like every other day.
Yeah, take it out of the plastic bin.
Yeah.
Put it in. Yeah, okay.
Aside.
Back to the fingernail test. When you are saving your wet processed seeds, they will crack if they are dry instead of squish. Here is just a list of thinking about seed storage. Again, temperature controlled, somewhere where the temperature is going to be pretty consistent. Below 50 degrees, ideally, 35 to 45 degrees is great. You really don't want it to be very warm where you're storing your seeds. I have like I don't know what those are called, but like the walk-in room before you go outside.
Mudroom?
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's what I call it, the mudroom.
Okay.
That is where I like to store my seeds. So paper is going to be better and over plastic. I just kind of like this, you know, people want to like have their seeds on display or in glass jars. That's great and it's beautiful and wonderful. Glass can be protective against insects and rodents and other things you need to worry about. If you live on a farm, rodents, oh my gosh, I've lost a lot of seed. That happens.
Mm-hmm.
So just keep that in mind. If you're like doing your basement or you live on a farm, like critters will find their way into seed if they can. If you're going to display your seeds, that's really lovely, but remember that they may not be viable when you go to try and germinate them. Label, label, label. These are just examples that I wanted to share. If you are sharing out your seeds and as you become a seed saver, it's so important to know all of this information. What is the crop you're growing? What is the scientific name? What variety? What are the years that you've grown it? Where was it grown out? Things like that. We have, as part of our seed cooperative, forums that Alex has created where we really ask people to give all this information. Was the minimum population and the isolation distance met, for example? But I really like this too. I like all these notes. I mean, it's just so important when you're passing along seeds or labeling your own seeds. Take these notes. Tell the story of what happened. What do they look like? Where did you get the seed originally? What is it best used for? What colors? You know, this is how tracking all of this is how you become a better steward, and really plays into the idea of creation when you are plant breeding. Okay, do you want to chat about it?
Yeah, so next thing you need to know, actually before you store your seeds, you want to do your germination test, and you're also going to want to include the results of your germination test on your label. So the best way to do a germination test is I generally like get a bowl of water out and I'll do, you know, something like this. And then I've even been taking, because I feel kind of weird about using paper towels so much. I've been, you know, taking one paper towel and carefully ripping it into two. And then I'll dip it in a bowl of water and just give it a quick squeeze to get the excess water out. And then once I have my two damp, not like soaking wet, but damp paper towels, what I'll do is I usually do about 30 seeds. So I'll place 30 seeds evenly apart. So maybe I'll create 5 rows and 6 columns, place them evenly apart. Now, if it's a really small seed like yarrow or parsley, I might just kind of trickle a few on there. But if it's something like a bean or a pepper seed, I'm going to place them evenly apart. And then I'm going to gently lay my other damp paper towel on top. From there, I'm going to slide it into a Ziploc bag. And then on that Ziploc bag, I'm going to write down banana pepper, saved, you know, processed. I'm going to write when I processed it, say November 7th. And then I'm going to write down if there's anything else interesting about it, like it was the pepper was moldy, or anything else that feels like worth noting that I'm trying to experiment with. And then I'm also going to write down the date that I started the germination test. And then what I do as well is I have a clipboard. And so I'll put a 1 on the paper bag, and then I'll put a 1 on my clipboard, and I'll write down banana pepper and the date it was started. So I have a column for the pepper, I have a column for the date it was started, and then I have a column that says 7-day germ, and then I have another column that says 14-day germ. So now I've got my labeled, very important, labeled plastic bag that has my germination test inside of it. I'm going to come back and look at it. I might look at it every day because I'm just like that, but I'm going to come back after 7 days, or I'll come back after 3 or 4 days, whatever. And I'm going to look at it by holding it up to the light. I don't take them out anymore because there's just too many issues there. So I'm going to hold it up to the light, preferably sunlight, and I'm going to see how many have germinated. And then if nothing's germinated after 5 days, I won't make note of that. But if something has, I might write that in the 7-day column. But mostly I'm going to look for 7 days, and then I'm going to see what percentage of the seeds have germinated after 7 days. Well, I'm pretty good with the number 30, so that's why I choose it. And if, 12 seeds have germinated after 7 days, then I'm going to say 20% germination rate after 7 days. And I'm going to come back and look at it again at 14 days. And if, say, all 30 have germinated, then I'm going to say, okay, 100% germination after 14 days. And then I'm going to note that on my sheet. And then I'm also going to include that on the label for those seeds, whether or not I'm distributing them or putting them in the seed bank or just saving them for myself. I want to know what that germination rate is. Now, if I get a germination rate that's 40%, I'm still going to share those with people. I'm just going to tell them that it's 40% so that they should plant 4 seeds for every one that they want to plant.
So important.
Yeah, and I'm also going to make sure, I'm going to check on my plastic bag to make sure that it's moist the whole time.
Yeah. Yep, that's really important that it will dry up.
It will,
So,
yeah.
okay.
Okay.
Moving right along, we are at 7:44, so
perfect.
We can roll. We are now going to please ask you if you have any questions for us on what we have covered to put it in the chat, because we are wrapping up. And the end of this is really us going to share with you some exciting opportunities. If you want to continue as a seed saver or you're just beginning, what's going on here locally and how you can get involved. Should I keep going?
Yeah.
Okay. So we have something called the Blazing Star Seed Cooperative, which is a baby seed cooperative of folks who are urban farmers, home gardeners, and other community organizations who want to come together to learn about seed saving together and to also practice seed saving, and then to bring that seed back to our seed bank. So that is the function of the seed cooperative. We really need more participation, more gardeners, more farmers to get engaged so that we can grow our seed bank and we can do more education. So this mini seed school that's being sponsored by Golden Hills, being held here at Iowa Western Community College in the greenhouse. This is part of the Blazing Star Seed Cooperative. We do education. We mentioned earlier that this is a mini, very shortened version of a longer program that we love to host, sometimes every year. Sometimes it doesn't happen every year. There's also a program called the Seed of the Year, which City Sprouts and the Big Garden are part of, and a larger group of folks selecting a seed for Omaha Council Bluffs and beyond, not just Omaha Council Bluffs. All of the folks out in the rural areas, you are involved too. We want you to be a part of it. The seed of the year was just announced. It is the Calypso bean. You can come to the seed share we're going to talk about in a minute and get some of that seed to grow out and join us. We want you to join us. If you want to start saving, get some pre-seed, grow a bean because it's a 1.0 skill. You can do it. We believe in you.
So one aspect of the seed co-op is education, and the other aspect is infrastructure. So the different types of infrastructure that we have for increasing or for supporting a robust seed saving culture in the metro area is coordinated growing. So if you'd like to grow out seed, so the seed of the year is a really great opportunity to just get to not only dip your toes into seed saving, but dip your toes into community seed saving. So that's like kind of the 1.0 on the seed saving end. It's always something that's easy to save so that you will be successful and you will be contributing to the seed bank immediately. But we also have these more like 2.0 opportunities, which one is coordinated growing. So if you'd like to grow out seed for this Blazing Star Seed Cooperative, every year at the beginning of the year, we have a spreadsheet that we share around and we coordinate who's going to grow what. Sometimes that coordination will be so we can grow as many varieties as possible so that Cait can grow one variety of tomato and I can grow another variety. But sometimes we coordinate so that we can get a really large minimum population from multiple different places. And so the seed of the year is a good example of that. The Calypso bean, we're going to get Calypso beans coming from 10, 20, 30, maybe even 50 different growing spots. So, you know, we've done that maybe with like blue corn in the past. We both grew some blue corn. So rattlesnake bean, yeah. So that's how coordinated growing works. And if you want to get involved in that, just shoot either one of us an email. We also host seed processing days in the fall. So they're held this past year. We did them every Sunday in October. And we did them, yeah, all month. At the seed processing days, you can bring seed from your own garden to be processed. If you do the seed of the year, this is definitely the opportunity to learn how to process that seed. If you don't have any seed to bring down to be processed, you can just come down to get hands-on experience doing wet seed saving and dry seed saving. And we've got food, we've got drinks, we've got music, we've got great conversation. So the point is that like, we want to talk about saving seeds while we're literally saving seeds. It's easier to remember how to process a squash seed when you're talking about it while you're touching a squash seed. And then it's also just this opportunity to create this culture around seed saving. It's fun. And we really want as many people as possible to participate in it. The seed that is processed at these seed processing days, yeah, so it's cool. You get to learn about seed processing and you also get to process a lot of seed. It's very awesome. And so the seed that's processed at these events is returned to the participant who contributed the seed, however much that they want back. And then we put some into the seed bank. And that is for genetic diversity and preservation. I'll talk about that in just a second. We hold some back for growing. So for folks who want to be a part of the coordinated growing efforts, we have our own little mini seed grow out seed bank. And then the rest of it gets put into the stream of the seed co-op where it gets packaged and labeled, and then it gets shared out at the seed share, which is coming up March 5th. We'll talk about that more in just a second. We also put it into the Omaha Public Library, Common Soil Seed Library. And then we partner with other organizations such as like the Council Bluffs Library or the Union for Contemporary Art or little free pantries around town. And we continue to share that seed out. And so if you get some of that seed, you can get into the coordinated growing and we can help you continue to save that. I think it's very dope situation. And then lastly, we also have the seed bank. So we maintain a seed bank of all the varieties of seed that were processed at the seed processing days. That seed bank is held back for genetic diversity and emergencies. So remember how I said before, if you only plant out 20 tomato seeds, that is an inadvertent selection process. That's why we have that seed bank, because we want to make sure that every seed that we save every year gets grown out. Might not be the next year, it might be 2 or 3 years down the line. And then additionally, if there's ever a run on seeds again, we will have a seed bank to pull from. And hopefully coming up here in the next decade, we'll have Omaha varieties of multiple types of seed.
Yeah. This is our contact info. We will share this out. So I'm just gonna skip that. Again, we'll share this PowerPoint out. I just want to highlight local seed sources and local seed companies. You will receive all this info. The last thing I think we want to mention is that there's 2 events coming up for you to continue to engage in seed sharing and seed saving. The Council Bluffs Public Library is opening the Prairie Rose Seed Library. So they'll have a seed library now. Saturday, March 5th from 11 to 2. So join in. It sounds like they're going to have also lots of activities there, but excited that they are starting a seed library. The other thing is 2022, the seed of the year is Calypso bean, and there will also be a seed share in Omaha. There's the address. We will share out the flyer. We're going to have handouts in this PowerPoint being shared out with you post this workshop. So don't worry if you didn't furiously take notes or you're like folding your laundry or getting your kids to bed while you're listening to this. We got you. You can go back and refer to all of this. There's a Facebook event for this. So check that out if you're on social media. Saturday, March 5th from 12 to 4, a really wonderful event.
Yeah, the Seed Use Chair will have music, food. It's going to have a lot of seeds from seed companies, but we'll also have 34 varieties from the Blazing Star Seed Co-op. You'll be able to get seed of the year there. We'll have seed saving resources. And also if you have saved seed, you can bring that down to share. We have some of those intake forms like Cait was saying. So even if you've shared seed and you don't feel like you have the isolation distance or the minimum population, bring them down and we can talk it out, and you can still share seed with people, but you'll just have a way of communicating to them that, hey, the isolation distance wasn't met here. So grow this seed out, but just know that it might not be true to type. So we want to encourage people to continue to save seeds, even if everything isn't 100%, perfectly met, but we just got to communicate that with folks.
Yeah. All right. It is 7:53. We're going to open it up for questions for a few minutes. If you have any, please feel free to type them in the chat. We will be here. Anything else you want to add? Do you want to hand me that stuff so I can just like show? I mean, yeah, so just as you are maybe typing questions, seeds in a jar, very dry pepper seeds in a jar, tiny little cutting boards. These are just some like tools that I like to use for seed saving, maybe that like sieve and the seed packets. We showed more things at the last workshop. It's kind of getting cold in the greenhouse here. So looking forward to turning the heaters back on. But these are really, really awesome for wet seed saving. I love little like sieves, get a couple of those on hand, paper packets for putting your seeds in as well. Yeah, we hope that you will come out to the seed share and we will be there. As Alex mentioned, the cooperative will have a table where you can bring your locally saved seed if you have any, or just come to learn more about getting involved in the Blazing Star Cooperative, as well as what you need to get ready this season for your own seed saving. You can get the Calypso bean too.
Yeah. And if you have any questions, shoot either of us an email at any point. And yeah, stay in touch.
Yeah, hopefully we look forward to more seed schools upcoming this year and more in-person things as it is safe and we can like be outside in gardens and farms. We would love to do more hands-on education. So we will say farewell. Have a great night. Thank you for joining Mini Seed School. Take care, everybody.
Right.